Hey everybody, this is Nick on Control Nick, and today I'm going to give you a bit of a masterclass on how to create professional grade line graphs in Excel. So essentially turning what you see as a basic Excel line graph like this into something that actually looks like this. Let's get started. Okay, so we're in the Excel workbook, and as you can see, we have an example line graph showing in here. We also have an example data set. This is going to be the line graph that we're going to be creating today. So essentially using the same data set, we're going to show the basic standard Excel line graph, and we're going to make all these tweaks and adjustments to make it look more professional grade, like the one that you see below. So first thing, what we're going to do is actually create a line graph and a basic one using the data set. First thing you want to do is click over to the data set that we have over here, and I'm just going to drag all the way over. And just make sure you cover the full set. So from all the way in the top left corner of the header, all the way down to the last piece of data that you want to show in here. So I have from month all the way down to 1300. Now all you do is go into Insert in Excel, and then a bit to the right, you have all the different chart options. I'm going to select the one that is a line graph. When you click, we're just going to make a 2D line graph. When I click here, it automatically populates the line graph for you. And as you can see, I'll just move this over a little bit. You can see the standard is much more basic looking than what we're going to be creating today. So it's a cool thing to keep in mind of how much improvement we're going to make to that line graph today. First things first, the noticeable differences are, in my personal view, there's too much clutter going on. Firstly, based off of what we're going to be doing, which is adding in these different data labels, we don't need to have these grid lines. So what you can do in this line graph, the first step is click here where you see that as I'm hovering over my mouse, I can select the exact grid line, and it's going to show these little dots here, meaning you're now working with the grid lines. You can either select backspace or delete. I'm just going to select backspace. That deletes the grid lines. So I actually don't use grid lines in my graphs because I typically use data labels. Also, let's work with the sizing a little bit. As you can see, as I've selected the outer of my line graph, again, to give you an example, if I click in here, I would be adjusting things within this area of the graph. But if you select outside of where it shows the visual, it selects the full graph. And that's what we want to be working with right now. What I want to do is make this line graph the exact same size as the line graph below. In order to do that, let's make a reference to the line graph below by checking the sizing in there. So actually, I'm going to right click inside this line graph, and then near the bottom, you have Format Chart Area. When I select that, you'll have three different main options. You'll also have some header options, but we're going to be mostly working with these three that I'm hovering over. The first one is fill and border. That's all regarding the coloring that you see in the graph. The middle one, that's more towards different effects. So you can give it some shadow, some glow. You can play around with that. To be honest, I typically never use this because it adds too much noise to the visual. The more simple these graphs look, the easier it is to convey the message or the story behind it. To the right is then the size and properties of the graph. So as a reference, our example graph has a height of 3.2 and a width of 9.6. That's all we need right now. So I'm actually going to go back to our example graph, and I'm going to right click up in this outer area, and then you'll have Format Chart Area again. When you do that, I'm going to go to Size and Properties, and then once again, we'll do 3.2, and then I select Tab to go to next, or you can just double click in there, and then type in 9.6, enter. Now we have the exact same size as our example graph, and I'm just going to move this a little bit. If you click and hold, you can drag around the graph from the outer area. You don't want to click in here because that will be dragging around the graph of its own, right? I'm going to undo, but you click on the outskirts and then you can drag the whole graph around. Nextly, what I like to do, and this is just an extra tip, is to adjust how the graph is impacted by how you're moving around columns and rows in the Excel workbook. So right now, this is just a standard graph. And if I click over to the right here, the size and properties, underneath size, you have the properties of a line graph. In there, it'll ask you, how does this graph get impacted by how you're moving around columns and rows in Excel? Right now, if you were to delete a row or delete a column that's within the range of this line graph, the graph is going to shrink and be adjusted. And you don't want that. You want to work with a consistent view of your line graph. So I'm going to click on the outskirts again, go back to properties, and I'm just going to say, for the sake of this Excel workbook exercise, let's not move or size with any cell adjustments. So now you can see if I were to, just as an example, move and expand this column, nothing's going to be adjusted here because now it's stuck within that exact spot. That's perfect. Next thing, you'll notice that there's a lot of different sizing of the text. We can start working with the header. Why don't we do that? Sales versus expenses. My thought is that whenever I create a line graph and have a header, I always want the color font of the text to be consistent across all of my work, whether it's within the workbook or within the visual itself. When I click here, you'll notice that in the top left corner, it's always going to default under home. It'll give you the exact font type, the font size, and the font effect. So I have Arial 24 bold, and also under the font color, it shows as a red, but actually if you click the drop down arrow, I have some recent colors that I'm always using. So mine is this dark teal color, and that's what we'll go with today. You can make it whatever you'd like, especially if you have some company specific colors. I'm going to go into chart title. I just click once and you can see it's all highlighted, and we're just going to replace chart title with the specific name, which is sales versus expenses. Now we have all of that, and I'm just going to highlight again because now we want to add in those effects. So it's the exact same as the one down here. So if I go into the font type, I'm going to type in Arial and enter. And that was 24 size. So I'll click into here, type in 24, enter. And then we want it to be bold. Last piece is the color. So I click on the drop down and I'm going to select a recent color being that dark teal. Next thing is, you'll notice that I don't have a default legend in my bottom example graph because for line graphs, I actually think it looks nicer if you have the legend next to the line itself. Now, you can always move the default area of the legend, but we're actually going to use text boxes for today's example because, again, we want to add some customization and kind of increase the quality of the line graphs today. I'm going to actually click on the legend here where you have sales and expenses. And similar to the grid lines, if you do backspace or delete, it'll delete legend. I'm going to click backspace. Quick trick, if you're not too comfortable with line graphs, what you can actually do is if you click the outer skirt, let me go over here, you'll notice that chart elements is an option. You can click on chart elements and you can always bring these different things back that you're deleting. So for example, if you want legend back, you'll notice as I'm hovering over, it'll show you what it will do. So we can always bring it back, but for today, we're not going to bring back the legend. I'm just going to click out of this. Okay, legend is gone. Now, I want to adjust the axis. So again, similar to the title, we're just going to copy the bottom graph example. So when I click onto the axis, you'll notice that it shows Arial again, 12, bold, and the exact same color as the header. Again, consistency is key for getting some professional grade line graphs. So again, I'm going to click up here and I'm going to type in Arial, 12, bold, and I'm going to use that default color. There we go. It's already starting to formulate itself a little bit closer to what we have below. Now you'll notice the big piece here, and this is a really cool trick I like to use, is on the axis over to the left, you'll notice that the bottom graph doesn't actually have any. However, it actually does. I just hide it a little bit because I still want to be sure I can adjust the scale of the axis. What I'll show you is, and I hover below. If you notice, my mouse is adjusting itself because there's something I can click in there. That's actually the hidden axis. When I click down there, you'll notice there's all of a sudden options I can do to format the axis. Under this axis options, you can have a minimum and a maximum. Typically, the automatic is starting at 0. However, because my smallest value here, which is under expenses, is 900, I just want to bring more of the space down. And it's completely up to you if you want to do this or not. I just think it looks a little bit clearer and it gives a little more scale to how you look at the data set. So if I double click into the minimum of this axis, I'm not going to start it at 0 and then up to 2000, which is the automatic. I'm going to start it a little bit higher so the axis is adjusted a bit more. But how do we actually hide the axis and then go from there? Well, first thing that I like to do is I'm going to click once up in the axis part here. And all I'm going to do is change the font size to 1. When you do enter, you see it already gets very small. Next thing is you make the axis font color the same as the background. So we have a default as white. We'll just leave it as default white. And then I'm going to change the font color to white as well. When I click away, it's already gone. So it's a real quick trick to still have customization of the axis without actually showing it. Now, what I'm going to do is it's a little bit tricky to get there, but you just need to hover over where all of a sudden you can click on the vertical axis. And then again, we're going to change the minimum to 800. We're not doing 900 because we don't want your axis to be all the way at this line down here. We want to give some cushion, but while still showing the scale of the numbers. So when I click enter, you'll notice that 800 then adjusts the scale of the graph. Now, I want to bring in the graph a little bit because this legend here is text boxes and we need enough space for the text boxes, right? I'm going to click not on the outskirts this time, but I'm going to click on the inner side where you have all of the different data points. And you'll notice you can adjust the scale. So as I'm hovering my mouse over, you can see all the different adjustments you can do. And I'm just going to hold down my click and I'm just going to drag this over so it's somewhat in line with the bottom graph. Now, sometimes it's tough to eyeball how exact it is when mimicking a graph like this. So I have a quick trick that I like to use. Maybe you have heard of a different one, but if I go to Insert in Excel and then I go to Shapes, I'm just going to make a real basic rectangle and I'm going to create the rectangle so it hovers over the January on the bottom graph or my example graph right to the edge of that J there. Then if I click again inside the graph, I'm just going to adjust the J. Oh, that was a little too much. So it's pretty much in line. And again, this might be too technical, but again, this is to make it as close as we can to replicating below. And it looks like it's pretty much there. So I'm just going to delete this rectangle by clicking and backspace, and it's gone. So we're pretty much mirroring that point between the below and the above graph. Now, I'm going to add in those different legend values. All you need to do is to create a text box within the graph is select the outskirts of the graph. And just like how we created that rectangle, we're going to now create a text box. However, the important thing to note is when you create a text box within a graph, you need to make sure that you have the outskirt of the graph selected and not having a selection out here. Because let me show you actually in just a moment. I'm going to click in the outskirts, insert, shapes, text box, and then I'm going to make the text box in here. And then just so we have some default text, you know what, let's just do sales right away. Now, if you hover over the edge, you'll notice those 4 arrow coordinates are showing. If you click, you can drag that around. But if I try to drag all the way to the left, I can only go to the edge of the graph because, again, we click that outskirt and put the text box within the graph itself. Now, if you had clicked on the outside and then put a text box, it wouldn't be within the graph. So it's just an extra trick to know when you're doing line graphs so that if you're making the scale of the graph different, like the width and the height, the sizing of that text box will also follow as well. Just makes it a little bit easier for you to work with. What I want to do is replicate just like we did with the access names as well as the title, is we're going to replicate the legend name. So when I click here, it shows Arial, 11, and bold. So we're going to do the same thing. Do the double click to show the full highlight. And I'm going to do Arial. We'll keep 11, bold, and then the font color is going to be the same as the line graph. I always make sure to do that so it's easy for the audience to connect the dots there. I'm just going to use that dark teal that we have here. And I'll make it a little bit smaller because we don't need all of this box space. And I'm going to bring that down. So around here, I would say is close enough. Then we need to do it one more time. So let's do it for expenses as well. I already have this text box pre-selected, and as you can see, the text box, when it's selected, is also within the selection of the outskirts of the graph. Now that I have the text box selected already, I'm just going to do Control for copy, C for copy, and then paste Control V. And you can see it pastes within the graph, and I can't drag it over still. Now I bring this one down, and we're going to call this one expenses. And we might need to make this one a little bit larger so there's enough room for the text, just like that. However, expenses actually has a different font color. So let's check what the font color is here. I go and select in this graph and double click. You can see I have this color. Again, I use my defaults that I have in here. You can use whatever default you'd like. So let's go back into here. I'm going to double click and we're going to call this brown. Sorry, I need to click into the line graph. And if I'm going too quickly, please consider just pausing the video so that you can catch up a little bit. I also have this whole Excel workbook attached in the description of the video so you can follow along. Okay, so we're clicking brown and there we go. We now have both of the legend titles. Now we need to adjust the actual lines a little bit more. One thing that I think is a bit of a hidden feature within Excel line graphs is most people use the default line type, which is this edged line to show every data point. However, what I really like to use and what I think gives an extra flair to a line graph is a smoothed line. So it makes it a little more rounded and a little more professional. So when I click on this line graph, the first option for the fill and line, where you can change the coloring and the width of the line and so forth, when I click under there, the very last option is called smoothed line. When I click on smooth line, do you see that? I'm going to uncheck again and then click. You'll notice it smooths the full line. Again, it makes it just look a little bit nicer for the user's eye. I'm going to do the same thing for the second line graph. You can't multi-select these lines, so you just have to do them individually when you're working with a line graph. So I'm going to go again, fill and line, smooth line. Notice I'm always working within this format data series. Quick reminder before we keep going, if you happen to have X'd out and you're just in the default and you need to go back to the format data series, you're not sure how, again, you click at the outer edge, right click, second to last option is format chart area. It brings you right back into it. Again, it's a good reminder and practice. Now, we have smooth lines. Now what we want to do is add some data labels, right? So we want to replicate what we have down there. So first thing I'm going to do is select the line. Then I want to add that element. So remember that element where I showed you to bring back the legend? This is now the opportunity to take advantage of this option because when you select chart elements in the top right, there's an option called data labels. I'm going to select that. I'm going to do the same thing for the second line. So we're just going to click and select data labels. There you go. So although the data labels are defaulted, it could still look better, as you can see, right? So first thing I want to do is put the data labels in the center, meaning that it's going to follow the line graph and not be below or above like the default shows. So when I click on just one of these data labels, it actually automatically clicks all of them in the beginning. Now you can adjust individual labels if you click on it again, as you can see here, but I'm actually going to click away, click them all once again. We're adjusting all of them at the same time. Now, if I go back to label options all the way to the right, uncheck this or show the full drop-down list, you'll see at the bottom you have label options. Now, right now it's defaulted as being above the line, but we want them to be in the center. I'm going to do the same thing for the bottom line. So I'm just going to click once, it clicks all of them automatically. This has already been defaulted because we're already working with the above one, and we're going to make these the center. Now let's click on these data labels again, and I'm going to go into the fill and line section. Before we start changing the coloring and so forth, Excel is a little bit tricky. It will reset all of your different formats of your data labels if you happen to change the shape of how the data label is within. Even though I have all these selected, I'm going to go in the tabs all the way to Format. Under Format, there's an option to the left called Change Shape. You can change the shape of how the data labels are sitting within the line graph. So you can use a default as like a rectangle, or you can change it to arrows, for example. You can change it however you like, but every time you change this shape, it's going to reset any of those preset filters that you had for the data label. So it's really important you consider this step first and you consider the shape of the data labels before you move on. For this example, I'm going to use this rounded edges rectangle shape. And we'll do it for both. So now that's defaulted. I'm going to click on the data label for the second line, and we're going to change the shape again to rounded edges. Now that we have that, I'm going to click above one more time. Now we can start formatting the coloring and the fill of this line graph data label view. So let's go to fill over to the right. We want a solid fill, and that solid fill should be the exact same color as we have below. So I want to change that color to a recent color, and then I also want to change the coloring of the font. You can do that easily by going to Home. We're just going to change it to white color. Now you'll notice it's still a little bit different. Again, the easiest way to replicate is just to select below to see what are the different pre-filled options. You can see it's Arial, but it's 8 size and it's bold. I'm going to click up here again. Under Home, it defaults. We need to change the font to Arial, the size to 8, and to bold. Looks pretty similar now. So the only thing that I would critique is maybe the legend is a little bit too close. We'll fix that at the end. Last piece is to have the border color adjusted. So the default is this gray. I want to change it so it's a white border. So it shows a little cleaner as it goes along the line. So we go back to fill and line. Then below fill, you have the border coloring. We're going to make it a solid color and it'll default as white. Looks pretty good now. Now let's do it all again so that it mimics the bottom graph. So we click onto here. We're going to go to fill and color. Fill will be a solid fill, and this time we want to make it that brown color, and actually let's make it a little bit of a lighter brown. Then again, we're going to make the text Arial, 8, bold, and then we're going to use a white coloring. Now, interestingly enough, you'll notice that all of a sudden this turned from 900 to 90 in the first data label, and same thing with this was 950, now it changed to 95. That's because the text became too big when we made it bold. And again, that's because in Excel, it will wrap the text around a certain area. And if the text becomes too big within that area, it will bring it down one to a new line. And now we can't actually see the numbers, which of course doesn't work well for us. We can fix that. Another cool tip. We are pre-selected in this line. All you would need to do is go to Size and Properties. Under Alignment, you'll see Wrap Text in Shape. I'm going to uncheck that box so that it doesn't wrap the text around the shape that it's given. It will just continue even over the shape if it's too big. And you'll see that fixes that issue that we just ran with right away. And now you can see 900 and 950 and so forth are showing again. Let's go back because we want to add in the border as well. We're going to select solid line and then the default is white. One of the last pieces we need to do is now change the line graph color. When I select the line at the top section, we're just going to go back again to where we have fill and line. We want it to be a solid line, and the default, we want it to actually be a recent color, which is the same color as actually the header and axis text, which is this dark teal. Then we want to mimic the brown that we have below. So I'm going to click the orange line that we have. We're going to change it to a solid line color. And let's use this brownish tan color that we have here. Should be pretty good. When I click away, you'll notice we've almost exactly replicated what we've used for the bottom graph. There's only two couple things I want to do at the end. First is adjust the legend a little bit. So I'm going to click on this legend for expenses. And again, you need to select and hold to adjust the space. So I'm just going to adjust it to around here. And then sales is a little bit too close to that 1200. So I'm going to do the same thing and adjust the spacing a bit more. Perfect. The last piece is the border around the graph. So I typically like to use a border. It just makes it pop a little bit more. And again, all you need to do is select the outskirts to get that fill and line section to the right. And I'm just going to change the border so that it's not automatic, but it's a solid, and it's going to be this dark teal. Beautiful. When we click away, you have a professional grade line graph that you can bring to any presentation to wow your audience. Thank you so much for watching today's video. If you did learn a thing or two, please consider liking and subscribing. It always helps. And consider taking a look at these two videos that are about to pop up on your screen that I find relevant for future Excel content that you might be interested in. Thank you so much and have a great day.